The real truth is streamers should be paying developers and publishers of the game they stream. They should buy a license like any real business and pay for the content they use. Those are the polarizing tweet words of one Mr. Alex Hutchinson, who some of you may know as the co-founder and creative director of Typhoon Studios, which is the developer behind the recent co-op adventure game Journey to the Savage Planet. And he's also the man who self-proclaimed that it was he who named the game's first DLC hot garbage. His opinion is basically that streamers and YouTubers are profiting from something they don't have the right to use, which is a polite way of suggesting that they're stealing and therefore infringing on copyright. We know that's his view since he put out that tweet alongside another tweet in which he paralleled an issue of copyrighted music in streams with showing game footage. Now, normally this would be some random's comment on the internet that would disappear into the Wayback Machine obscurity, but in this case, the guy who said it has his title listed in his bio as Creative Director, Google Stadia. Of course, it doesn't read Creative Director at Google Stadia now because after this all blew up across the internet, he actually changed it. But before he did change it, many people took his opinion as having come from the top head at Google Stadia, since that's how it read in his bio, and therefore that his opinion was a reflection of Google's thinking process about their future direction. But it really isn't. Yes, Alex Hutchinson is a creative director at Google Stadia, so that bit's true. I believe his title is the Montreal Studio Creative Director of Stadia Games and Entertainment. Take a breath, which seems far too long a title to be taken seriously for a start. But what he's not is the Creative Director of Google Stadia. That's an important difference. He's basically the creative director of a studio that was bought by Google, who then funneled him into the Stadia team, title change and all. What specific creativity he provides to Google Stadia, I don't really know. That's anybody's guess. But painting a picture of streamers and YouTubers as copyright infringers doesn't seem to be a part of it. So much so that Google themselves jumped straight into damage control and issued the following statement to 9to5google.com that reads, "The recent tweets by Alex Hutchinson, creative director at the Montreal studio of Stadia Games and Entertainment, do not reflect those of Stadia, YouTube, or Google." And of course they don't. If they did, Google wouldn't have paid a high number of streaming influencers to promote Google Stadia. Even with paid influencers, we all know Google Stadia's launch didn't go very well and that it's still floundering to this day. I'd say it's still hanging in there though. It's maybe not as dead in the water as many people seem to think Google Stadia is, well at least for now. And I have to think that's in no small part due to those influencers that continued to promote it because they were paid to do so. Well, think about Hutchinson's own game, Journey to the Savage Planet. This game was released on consoles, but on PC it was limited as an Epic Games exclusive. It's currently listed in Epic's Supporter Creator Program too, which means plenty of streamers and influencers were and still are promoting the game and getting paid a commission to do so. Would he really believe his game would have done better if those Epic Store affiliates had to pay to promote the game instead? Would a single one of them have bothered if that was the case? The answer is, of course, no. I can't even fathom how you could think otherwise. The problem with the narrow-minded view that streamers are nothing more than pirates piggybacking off of other people's work is that it ignores the key reason why advertising exists in the first place, and that's to add perceived value to a product via the act of positive exposure. If you give enough positive exposure on a wide enough scale, a percentage of those who are exposed will buy in. That's how sales are made. And it doesn't matter if it's a digital product or a physical product like a flagship mobile phone or a car or a game. Streamers and YouTubers add perceived value to games and provide positive exposure of them to a wide-ranging audience. And they do it in a variety of ways. They do it with personality, they do it with entertainment, they do it with positive reviews, and they do it with help guides that take the frustration out of playing games for many when they hit brick walls. And of course they do it by allowing people who will never buy the game in the first place to see it and experience it through their eyes, which, while I'll admit that alone doesn't help with direct sales, it still adds value because it indirectly fuels the word of mouth machine. Now, there isn't one business owner, marketer, or games publisher on the planet that doesn't understand the importance of word of mouth. And of course, what we're talking about here, for the most part, is the free advertising games are getting courtesy of streaming and YouTube videos. Or to rephrase that, the free marketing services game companies are making use of here. And most of them know that's what they're getting. Just look at how much effort the studios behind games like Warframe and Destiny, as just two examples, put into keeping their streamers and YouTubers happy. They know how important it is for their bottom line. Warframe goes out of its way to even run a creators program that actively helps creators do what they need to do to expose Warframe to more and more people. As just one of many, many examples. There's so many, but you get the picture. Hutchinson says streamers and YouTubers should also pay for the content they use. The reality check here is that most of us do. There isn't a game on my channel that I haven't paid for unless it was already free to begin with. I've bought every single game I've ever covered. Most streamers and creators do the same. The irony here is that the only streamers and YouTubers who don't pay for their own games are actually very large influencers who were handed the games for free by the publishers of those games. Publishers aren't throwing out free copies of these games to them because it hurts their business. They do it because it's free advertising and they know it directly and indirectly generates them sales. Now, there's an argument that the free advertising helps the game get sales point of view doesn't hold up when influencers and streamers give bad game press. Sure, obviously that can be true. Bad game press happens, like when a game is really shit. In those circumstances, the company that made it definitely doesn't want free advertising because obviously it's not going to help. But by the same token, in Hutchinson's world, those publishers wouldn't charge a fee to allow those shitty games to be streamed either. Why would they? Well, unless the streamer was guaranteed to give a positive review, which obviously then they would, and I might talk about that in a moment. Otherwise, negative press is negative press. So if they've got a shitty game, they just won't allow anyone to pay a fee to be able to stream it. They just wouldn't want anyone to know their game was shit. So nobody would stream it, nobody would show it, and nobody would be exposed to it except via the carefully constructed advertising promotions paid for by those publishers who are trying to keep the truth of their shitty game a secret. And yes, I'm talking about blatant false advertising designed to sell you shit-tier games. That happens even now, make no mistake, but the world that we'd have if Hutchinson got his way would be rife with it. It would be way worse. And that's just one aspect of that world. I can see another where influencers who don't say positive things get flat out refused the option to pay a fee to stream the game they want to play. Positive influencers only, thanks, would be the motto of every publisher in that world. And the irony here is, if the industry took the approach that Hutchinson thinks they should, and to be clear, they never will because they're not that stupid, but if they did, it would actually lead to more negative press for games than ever before. A lot of streamers and influencers are influenced by the fact that they get free games handed to them to expose to their audience, right? It's harder to feel negative about a game you got for free than one you spent a small fortune on. But there's also the darker side to that where many influencers just don't want to burn their bridges. They want more free games in the future to play and review and stream and show their viewers. And because of that, they have to tread carefully with what they say about it. This creates a situation where many content creators will be more inclined to vocalize a negative aspect of a game in a constructive manner than to simply just shit all over it. And this keeps the wheels turning. They have to kind of do that. But fast forward into Hutchinson's world, and you can see publishers refusing fees to anyone who doesn't give them glowing reviews. There will be no occasional soft approaches from streamers trying to balance the fine line between honesty and keeping a door open. Either you say positive things, or you get refused the right to pay the fee. That's the kind of future where streaming becomes a pseudo-false advertising platform filled with paid-for publisher lackeys, all masquerading as actual streamers. Those not willing to become lackeys simply won't have anything to show, and their streams and channels will cease to exist. Which brings me back to the point I made earlier about the perceived value of a game. If a game costs you nothing, your perceived value of it is higher right from the start. Get a game on special, and your perceived value of it will be higher than if you'd bought it at full price. Can you imagine what the perceived value of a game would be if not only did you have to buy it, but then you also had to pay an ongoing revenue fee just for the right to show yourself playing it? Like, new PS4 games are $125 in Australia. Imagine that plus a 5% fee for every video you post showing yourself playing it. That's some pretty low perceived value right from the start. If you don't get what I'm saying, here's the simple rocket science. A game with low perceived value gets more negativity. A game with higher perceived value gets less negativity. Start treating gameplay like copyright pirated movies and apply an ongoing fee to it, and you're going down the path of low perceived value and high negativity. And that means more negative reviews. For someone like Hutchinson who really hates aggregated critic scores, I can definitely see he won't like the world he wants to create, since aggregated critic scores will become even more important to consumer decisions in that world than they are now. I'm pretty sure he might be very surprised also when, in his proposed future, his games suddenly start gathering way more negative reviews than even he, with his incredible hot garbage level of creativity, could have imagined. Maybe even more surprised than when he opens his mail to find a gazillion bills for advertising fees from thousands of content creators around the world, which I'm sure he'd happily pay, given in his own words he said, "Creators of content should be allowed to make some money from other people using their content for profit. If I'm advertising your game, you're using my content for your profit. What goes around comes around, right?" But let's be honest, none of this is ever going to happen. Think about it. Charging fees for game content is a complicated business. Too complicated, in fact. It's a serious grey area that reminds me of the current problem with YouTube's music copyright system. If you make an hour-long piece of content and include a 20-second piece of copyrighted music in that, the copyright holder of the music can then claim that video as their own, and I mean the whole video, completely ignoring the other 59 minutes and 40 seconds of original content from the actual creator. They can then take all the advertising revenue from the whole hour-long video as if they themselves had made that entire hour of content. Now, how is that okay? How can almost an hour of one person's creative effort be completely negated by 20 seconds of somebody else's? And that's exactly the kind of thing that happens in these you need to share your revenue with the original creator types of scenarios. And yes, while music is a very different thing, that's true, the parallel here is still very similar to the issue at hand, because it is very difficult to try to work out how such splits should occur. And gaming is even more grey than a simple segment of music because the game provides you the tool to make the content, but the gamer is the one that must use it to actually make that content. You don't just open up a game and record it like you might pirate a movie and put that out as content. No, you have to play it. You have to use the game to create your content, you have to invest your time to do that, you have to inject your decision making into it, and you have to inject your creativity into how you go about doing that. How do you put a measure on all of that? So not only do you have the streamer, what they say, and the unique entertainment they provide as they do all that, but you also have uniqueness of what they do with the game, their own uniqueness that's different to everybody else. That's one of the draw cards of streaming. People like to see their favourite streamers because they're unique. They like to watch their unique way of doing things. How could you possibly create a fair revenue split system for that? How could you possibly say, well, you moved your controller D-pad 2% that way at that point compared to the norm, so we need to split that 98% to me and you can have 2%. Or how could you say, nah, we'll make it fair, it'll just be a 50-50% split, you get 50%, we get 50%. But that's not fair either. What about the content creator who slaves for 12 hours a day to create entertainment as their entire vocation versus Johnny Nobody who records 10 minutes on their PS4 just before school and uploads it to YouTube? I mean, of course, Johnny Nobody won't really exist in this world because Mother Nobody won't be paying no stupid fees for Johnny's game channel, at least until he clears his room. But let's say I'm wrong with that. Let's say some bright accountant type out there can come up with a fair fee and a fair system to implement to monitor it all. What then? Well, that's when that very fair percentage of everything Johnny Nobody and his favourite streamers create gets siphoned off to the publisher. And to be clear, a publisher and a developer are two different things. There'll be a benefit to a millionaire publisher CEO and a bunch of leeching shareholders, many of whom have director in their names. Funny about that. But that'll be about it. The real talent, the real creative directors of the show who aren't hot garbage, that's the guys who actually spend time making the game, coding it, the guys who do the crunch time and miss out on seeing their families for weeks at a time, who lose endless hours of sleep over the bugs in the game that they have to fix. Those guys, they'll get next to none of it. And right there is the real issue here. This isn't about the people doing the work to make and promote games. It's about greed coming from a small dark corner of corporations, from people with chief and director in their names, for whom enough is never enough, where the desire to make more and more money consistently overshadows common sense. These people couldn't give a shit about 99% of streamers and content creators who actually don't make squillions. Those people who work for a real living and do it part-time. They do their streaming part-time, or they create their YouTube videos part-time, or those that slave over their channel full-time but can still barely pay the rent. All they see are the less than 1% that make more than that, and then they use that to paint this rich picture over the entire streaming industry, and then they want to take money from that. It's just another example of the people at the top having zero clue about the mountain they're on top of and who they hurt with their decision making. That's my take on it anyway. What do you think? Do you think that all these corporations should be able to stop everyone from being able to share their gameplay without paying fees to do so? Do you think Alex Hutchinson will happily volunteer a fee to Devolver Digital while he's streaming Fall Guys, because he's the type of guy to put his money where his mouth is? Or do you think streaming a game is an act of piracy and all content creators should be arrested and, I don't know, maybe even water tortured for their crimes? Fire away in the comments. Thanks for watching.